everyone, Raven Sludge here, straight out of Lavender Town, and let's talk a bit about Capcom today. You know, Capcom, the once roundhouse kings of developing fighting games about 30 years ago, way back in the day, and honestly, I miss those days growing up in that era. And speaking of fighting games, have you ever heard of a Capcom game called Capcom Fighting All-Stars? You may not have heard of that one, but it was actually a canceled game in the early 2000s that Capcom was working on. However, when they actually had it tested in local areas, well, long story short, it didn't do well and the project itself was scrapped. Initially, it was going to be a fighting crossover of Capcom's own characters and IPs. Now, even though the project of Capcom Fighting All-Stars was scrapped due to the fact that the game just was not well received at all, Capcom did eventually move on to making a different game afterwards called Capcom Fighting Evolution. And this game, just like the previous one, would be a mix-max of different Capcom characters and IPs in a fighting game. However, this one was not well received. And it exists, but it was not a fan favorite. In fact, it's considered one of the bottom of the barrel fighting games from Capcom. But what if there was a new and modern Capcom Fighting Evolution that was released on modern times and consoles that actually had an updated roster, including some classic and modern Capcom characters and IPs in that 2D fighting game? Because I honestly do feel like this game does have potential if it was done right and had, an actual good representation of a roster, of Capcom's history. And with that being said, that's where this video comes in today. Join us as we build a what if roster for a new Capcom Fighting All-Star. And also, just a quick disclaimer, this list is just my opinions of what list and, roster I would have and what characters I'd include in a 2D fighting game for Capcom. If you have your own, feel free to let me know if you agree or disagree and list it in the comments down below. And also, feel free to like and subscribe as it does help out with the video algorithm. And feel free to subscribe to videos for more content and to join the Gengar gang today. Alright, and without further ado, let's go ahead and begin building that roster. Alright, so first on our roster, we have Ryu from Street Fighter. And let's be honest, you didn't expect him to not appear in this game, did you? He's going to be on the roster whether you like it or not. He is literally the face of Street Fighter. And it being a Capcom fighting game crossover, I mean, come on. So yeah, I do understand that Street Fighter 6 did age up Ryu a bit, obviously, because the timeline is moving and changing. But I figured in this game, the characters would just be their default, usual ages and designs. And why not have alternate costumes? But that's probably a different topic or video for a different day. But yeah, leading off first is Ryu from Street Fighter. Our next Street Fighter character would be Ken from Street Fighter, being he's the Luigi to Ryu's Mario. You can't have one without the other, I feel. It felt weird to leave Ken off, so I included him. He will probably be a more rush-down, aggressive Shoto, like he plays now in Street Fighter 6, which is honestly, it's a good variety. You're going to have a few Shotos here and there. It happens in fighting games. Probably won't be too many, but honestly, we have Ken, so that's our next Street Fighter rep. Keeping up with our Street Fighter representatives, we have Chun-Li next. The First Lady of Fighting Games would be an obvious pick. She's just as recognizable as Ryu and Ken, if not more popular, and it would feel like a crime not to include her, so of course I had to add her to this list. So Chun-Li definitely makes it in on this roster. Our next Street Fighter rep would be Akuma, who would again be a crime not to have him on this list. He is extremely popular and a well-loved character of the series, and also very important, I should add, to Street Fighter. Now, Akuma is aged up in his reveal trailer as he is an upcoming DLC character at the time it's recording making a video. But like I mentioned for you, the characters would have their usual classic designs. So maybe there could be a thing to have alternate designs or aged up costumes, but just so you know, Akuma is on this roster. It just makes too much sense not to include him. Alright, trailing behind Akuma, we have M. Bison. The Mighty Bison, the former big bad of Shadowloo and Street Fighter series, is going to be added to this roster. It makes too much sense to not have him as well. He's pretty iconic and important to a large majority of the series as well, and is like the main go-to villain. So he's pretty popular as well. Maybe not to the levels of Chun-Li and Akuma, but he's still up there. And he's pretty fun. He's a fun character. I feel like he's a great choice, so we have him added as well onto this roster. And our last Street Fighter rep will be a personal favorite of mine, surprise, surprise, Juri from Street Fighter, who skyrocketed in popularity since her initial debut in Street Fighter 4, onward to 5 and 6. I myself am a player in Street Fighter 6, to be honest. But she offers a great playstyle and is a bit of an anti-hero and quote-unquote as people call her, the evil Chun-Li. So I felt like she'd be a great choice for this roster, and honestly, I can see her being added to, like, if there was like an upcoming Marvel versus Capcom or Capcom versus SNK or Capcom versus game. It just makes sense. I'm actually surprised she was, not in like any previous ones, even though we had like only a couple recently. So yeah, that being said, I feel like Jury is a great choice here. Now, moving away from Street Fighter, getting onto our next Capcom series IP, we have Mega Man. And as for our first Mega Man rep, we have, well, classic Mega Man. It's kind of a no-brainer. I feel like he should be on the roster as well. Now, I know there was the whole debate, about should it be classic Mega Man X, Volnut, Star Force. So in this case, we're going to go with classic Mega Man. He has been in some previous Marvel vs. Capcom games, notably 1 and 2. I don't remember if he was in the third one. I think he was actually absent, oddly enough. But to me, it just feels like you have to have some Mega Man representation. And, the Blue Bomber deserves it at this point in time. So we have Mega Man as our first Mega Man rep, of course. So here's a popular pick that a lot of people, including myself, have often wondered why he was left out of Capcom crossover of fighting games, and that being Proto Man from Mega Man as well. Mega Man's older brother, so to speak, would be a great choice, I feel. He's a bit different from Mega Man, of course, but has his own merits, and it's just a cool, variety to add into the games. Has a shield, his own abilities as well. He differentiates himself well, in my opinion, and he's quite requested, honestly, from what I've seen on the internet after doing my research a bit. So Proto Man is our second Mega Man rep in this case. Our next Mega Man rep is Bass from the Mega Man series, and admittedly, Bass is a character I do not know a ton about. I've played very little of his games, as I've only played a couple of Mega Man games, to be honest. And there's going to be some uncharted territory or games and character series I just do not know a ton of. In fact, I did have to do a bit of research and ask, friends who play other Capcom games for help as well. The main things I play from Capcom, obviously, are the fighters as well, and some Mega Man. Specifically, classic Mega Man more so, and the Legend series. But yeah, Bass is our next rep for Mega Man. Now, as you're watching this on your screen, ask yourself this: did you really expect me not to include Mega Man X as well? Sure, I have classic Mega Man, but why not have both? I figured we could have our cake and eat it too, and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, the newest one, had Mega Man X added. Not classic Mega Man, but I still thought that was a cool inclusion, and I would honestly love to have both, especially if we can find a way to differentiate them. I'm sure Capcom would think of something, but in this case, again, this is a what-if build that roster, so there we go. Mega Man X, it just felt right. It just felt right to have him, so here he is. So going on forward with our next Mega Man pick, and along the lines of characters who just felt like obvious choices, we have Zero from Mega Man. Zero also felt like an obvious pick, and it just makes sense to have him. We have Mega Man X. He was just the last topic we just spoke about a second ago. So Zero is a no-brainer, and I do know about the memes of how he's top tier in almost every fighting game or competitive game he's in, which is kind of funny to me still. But yeah, Zero makes it into this roster. He's honestly pretty iconic to the series as well, if you ask me. As for our last Mega Man rep pick, we have Tronbon. Now, I know the whole thing with Mega Man Legends 3, we have 1 and 2, but we never got 3 with Capcom, if I remember correctly, and fans have been clamoring for that for years. So she's not exactly the most relevant Mega Man character, but hey, she's still, honestly, I don't want to say beloved, but she's still pretty popular in certain parts from what I've heard. And she's a fun character, honestly. She's kind of wacky. She was an interesting surprise to find in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and also 3, as she was in both of those games. I know Mega Man Legends was more relevant around that time period, especially the second Marvel vs. Capcom. But yeah, Tronbon in this game as well. I just felt like she would be a fun pick as well and add some variety to the roster. So she's our last and final Mega Man pick as well. Next off, after Mega Man, we're getting into our next Capcom IP, which is, and of course, we're getting into some uncharted territory for myself. I don't know a lot about this one and the next following one, but we have Devil May Cry, as you can see on the screen. Our next Devil May Cry rep, or I should say first one in this case, will be Dante, who is the face of the series. I know that much at least. Being the main character of, I believe, most of the games, if not all of them. He's kind of a no-brainer. In fact, I think he was actually in, was it Marvel vs. Capcom 3 or Infinite? I think he was in the last 2 at least. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below. Again, I don't really play Devil May Cry or Resident Evil, so some of those games I don't know a ton of. But I digress. I have some friends that do. So obviously Dante would be our first pick for Devil May Cry. Now, the next rep for Devil May Cry series will be Virgil. And Virgil as well, I had to do some research and ask around about this. I have heard from several people that Virgil would be a decent rep as well, and that they would actually love to have him in the game. And, differentiate, some of the characters, give them things they're known for, make their play styles different, what have you. I think that might be a good time, honestly. And our next rep, the third one for Devil May Cry, would be Nero. Nero, just like Virgil and Dante, is pretty important to the series, I've been told. Again, I had to, get this information from research and, people who play these games in the series, because it's fairly new to me. But to my understanding, Nero is also a pretty wanted character as well for Capcom Fighting Games and crossovers, and he'd be welcome addition, so I figured I'd add him to this roster as well. So our next Devil May Cry character is yet another I don't know much about, if not all of them from Devil May Cry, but her name is Trish, and she would be our next rep. One I've been told from friends who play the series that she is also a bit popular as well. And then the next rep after her would be another character by the name of V. And this is a guy that was supposedly very popular and still is. I have a friend that has him as a profile picture on her social media accounts. So I figured why not? More popular IPs of Capcom will be having more characters. I would say no more than 6. Your Capcom, Darkstalkers, Devil May Cry, and Resident Evil, usually having 5 to 6. So those would be the reps I chose in this case for Devil May Cry. And we have one more after this. So our last Devil May Cry rep, and forgive me if I mispronounce this character's name. I believe the name is Nello Angelo. I mean, you can see his PNG on the screen, most likely. But I was told by a fan who plays this game series as well to add him, and he was my suggestion that I got from my friend as I was doing research on who to add, because I don't know who to add for Devil May Cry. But I've been told that he is, pretty popular, would be a good choice, and it has his followings as well. So I figured why not add him to round him out the rest of the Devil May Cry roster, and that's pretty much our, I believe, 6 for Devil May Cry, and we have currently. So Nello Angelo is our last one for Devil May Cry. All right, and moving on to our next series with Capcom, we have Resident Evil, the ever so popular horror genre, and another one I don't know a ton of. I've only seen gameplay of 7 and 8, like I've watched a playthrough on YouTube, but I digress. I have friends, in high places, so I do know that obviously Leon Kennedy is a popular pick, and I think he's been in a couple of the Marvel vs. Capcom games already. So he'll be out on this roster as our first rep for Resident Evil. Then we have Chris Redfield and his boulder punching action. I know about that joke as well, memes aside. Chris Redfield's the second rep. And then last but not least, well, not last, I should say, but the last of this section is Ada Wong as well. And she is another one I did not know was popular that people have told me that they want included. So I figured why not throw her in. So those are our first 3 with Resident Evil. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. And just to let you know, of course, our next rep is Jill Valentine for Resident Evil. However, I believe she was actually in a couple of Marvel vs. Capcom already. And to my understanding, she's fairly popular, so that's why I added her on this list. Again, I don't know a ton about her. But hey, she makes this roster as our next pick for Resident Evil. And last but not least, our final rep for Resident Evil will be Wesker. And for what friends of mine have told me who play the game series, he is pretty prominent in some titles, and I think he was a villain or boss. I don't know a ton again, but that's what we have him add to this roster as our final Resident Evil rep as well. And that closes out Resident Evil. All right, and our next Capcom series is another one I'm quite a bit familiar with, actually. One of my favorites, Darkstalkers. And of course, our first Darkstalker rep would have to be pretty much the face of it herself now, Morgan Ensley, who was like the main protagonist. She kind of took the spotlight from Dimitri. She and him were supposed to be both the main protagonists, but she kind of became more popular. But she's already been in pretty much all the Marvel vs. Capcom games, Capcom vs. SNK 1 and 2, several crossovers. I mean, she's still like the most prominent, even though the game series Darkstalkers is kind of on life support at this point. I wouldn't say entirely dead. Capcom does exist, but they're not making any new games, certainly. But anyways, I digress. Morgan will be our first addition to the roster as a Darkstalkers character. Now, speaking of Dimitri, he is actually our second Darkstalkers rep. And at first, I was debating on myself if we should even add him. He's not as popular as Morgan, but he does have some fans still. And quite a few people actually play him, especially in Vampire Savior The third Darkstalkers game. The Japanese name of it was Vampire Savior, Lord of Vampire. So he does have some popularity, some following, and I figure why not. And he's another Shoto character, of course, but why not? Shotokan character, but whatever. Let's just go ahead and add him. I mean, he's pretty iconic still to a degree, and you're gonna have a vampire in a game that about Darkstalkers. Like, it just makes sense. So yeah, Dimitri makes it as our second pick for Darkstalkers. Now, our third Darkstalker rep is our resident cat girl, Felicia, who I would honestly argue is the second most popular character in Darkstalkers after Morrigan. Maybe Lilith, but I feel like she eclipses Lilith's popularity because people just know her. She has a lot of merch and figurines, even the official ones still coming out. And she was in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and 3, so that's something. Because usually it's just Morrigan or a mixed mash. But yeah, so she was actually the second one that came to mind for me when making this list, this roster. So she takes our 3 spot for Darkstalkers, the third rep, the Darkstalkers series. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our next rep. So we'll go ahead and say bye, Felicia. And yes, I did have to say that bad joke. Forgive me. Our next Darkstalker rep, coming in at number 4, is Jeddah Doma, who was pretty much the main antagonist and a problem child himself in Darkstalkers 3, aka Vampire Savior, Lord of Vampire, where he tried to create a new god, essentially, in their series. So yeah, he's kind of a problem at times. He was also in Marvel vs. Capcom, well, technically the 4th one, but Infinite in this case, which is the 4th iteration of the Marvel vs. Capcom games, for the most part. I was actually surprised that he was added to the roster. I was like, what? But anyways, he's a pretty cool character. And I figured, why not? I mean, I feel like people would love him if they knew more about him and he had more exposure. So I felt, why not add Jeddah to this roster as well? He was relevant in the most recent one, so there we go. We have him added. Our next Darkstalker rep is John Talbane, also known as Gallon, I think, and forget my pronunciation again, in the Japanese version, but he is our resident werewolf of Darkstalkers, and he's pretty cool. He's a Kung Fu werewolf, Kung Fu master that turns into a werewolf, and that's actually pretty dope, using nunchucks and martial arts. He's a pretty cool character. I feel like he'd have a lot more fans if he had more exposure, but he's unfortunately not been any of the other games outside Darkstalkers to my knowledge. But yeah, I felt like he would be a fun addition to have in this game. A cool Kung Fu rushdown, Darkstalkers characters, because why not? And I feel like more exposure, he'd get more fans. So he's a cool pick, and that's why we have him added to this roster as the next pick for Darkstalkers. Our next Darkstalker rep, and goodness gracious, we have BB Hood from Darkstalkers. And the reason why I said goodness gracious, this young lady is a demon herself, despite being human. Who would have thought that the one human character is the most demon out of all of them? I mean, I guess she's considered a villain or antagonist, at least the Darkstalkers. She completely does not like any of them, pretty much, and wants to just kill them. I believe she was a mercenary, if I remember correctly, as well. So she was a pretty interesting character, honestly, with the whole, innocent disguise Red Riding Hood, take and using guns and bullets and missiles and huntsmen. And I think she was in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 as well. So, a fun fact there. So, I figured why not add her to this roster. She's a fun character, and now some variety gets to the roster too. It rounds it up a bit. So, that's why she makes it as our last Darkstalkers rep as well. And we're going to be closing out the series of Darkstalkers and moving on to the next IP next. Getting into our next Capcom game series, we have the game Okami. And with this character from this game series, Okami, we have Amaterasu. So she is the sole representative of Okami, and I don't think that's good enough. She was in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and that was actually a surprise rep and a cool one, in addition, in my opinion. Our resident sun goddess, Pup. Enough said, she's the main character of her game, Okami. So what more needs to be said? She honestly carries, and she's a pretty cool character, honestly. Have you not played that game? If you haven't, as you're hearing this video, check it out. I definitely recommend it. But yeah, that closes out the Okami series, as Amaterasu is our sole rep, so that's good enough, honestly. So, moving right along, our next series from Capcom is Dead Rising. And this is another one I've never actually had a chance to play, to my knowledge. I don't think so. But I have heard of Frank West, and he's actually our first rep of the Dead Rising series. Now, originally I was just going to only include him, but I figured why not? You know, Frank West he was in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, I believe, and also Infinite, the 4th edition. So we're going to add him, but we also have a second rep. We have Chuck Green as well. And Chuck Green, to my knowledge, I was advised that, you know, he might be a good pick, and he's very prominent as well in the game. Or at least that's what I was told. I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I was advised. And I was told that he might be a good pick. A few people actually have been, you know, salivating at the idea of him being in this game. So why not? That's why I went with Chuck Green as the second rep. Plus, is it just me, or does anyone else think that he looks like John Kreese from Cobra Kai? I believe that was his name, but he looks just like him. I'm sorry. That's just to me, though. But yeah, so Frank West and Chuck Green are our first and second rep for the Dead Rising series, and the only 2 reps. That's pretty much it for this IP. I'm going to go ahead and move on, though, but that's what I have so far for them. So our next IP with Capcom is Ace Attorney, and why not the Ace Attorney himself, Phoenix Wright. Now, he was in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 as well. I don't think he was in the 4th one, which is Infinite, to my knowledge, but he was definitely Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Ultimate, so I figured he might be a fun character. I don't know if I'd make him a joke character, but he could be, honestly. I did debate on putting Dan from Street Fighter in this game as well for the roster, but I digress. It's a different topic. In which we have Phoenix Wright. It's just funny to see him, you know, do this thing as a playable character in the fighting game to me. So I think that's hilarious. And that's how he makes the roster. Moving on to our next Capcom game series, we have Asura's Wrath. And of course, the sole rep of this one is Asura, who I was actually surprised has never been included in a Marvel vs. Capcom game. I think he came out between the 3rd one and the 4th one, which is Infinite, between Ultimate and Infinite. So I guess that's why he was never included, and I guess, you know, they didn't really want to add him into the 4th one. But I'm looking at this character, and I've seen gameplay of this game. I remember when it was, you know, it first came out, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, this is actually kind of neat. I feel like he meshes in well with like a Street Fighter, or, well, I don't know. I can't see really with any other IPs say mixing in well, but I think in a versus game he'd do pretty well. He has a cool look and the whole gimmick that, you know, he's literally just an angry dude trying to get revenge, if I remember correctly. I haven't played the game, but that's what I remember hearing from what I saw in snippets and gameplay and cutscenes. So, yeah, he's got a cool look. I think he'd be a cool addition. That's why I have him added to this roster. So, Asura will be the next rep. All right, our next series we have next is Strider. And, of course, the sole rep of this one, we have Strider Hiryu, who I believe was present in all 4 of Marvel vs. Capcom games, 1, 2, 3, and Infinite, which is the 4th one. And I mean, he's a ninja that comes and just handles business. No more needs to be said. He's a pretty cool dude. He's popular, and he's got a following in both the West and Japan, from what I was always told. And he's just flashy and fun. So why would he not be in this roster? I had to add him, a no-brainer. So there he is, and here he is. He is the sole rep of Strider from his own series, named after himself. So that's basically it for him. He is the sole rep of his game series. Going to move on to the next IP. All right, as for our next series, we have Monster Hunter, and, well, you may have seen this coming. Monster Hunter is the sole rep there. Monster Hunter was the sole rep in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, the most recent one, which was a good choice. I mean, having a mix of different weapons and skills from the series, kind of like a mix mash that represents, you know, its series entirely, is a good choice in my opinion. And I like things like that. You can have one character that just does it all, because it's mostly just avatar and supporting characters from what I've played. I've played maybe like 2 or 3 of the games and owned a couple of them. So I don't know a ton, I'm no expert. I have friends that play a lot more, but yeah, I think that works out well for Monster Hunter, and that's why she makes it in on this roster as well as the sole rep for her series. P-Net. Woo! Our next game series, we have Rival Schools, and here's one I actually miss. I didn't play a ton of it growing up, but it was around in the arcade where I was a kid, and I think my cousin and I played it a few times at a local bowling alley whenever I went to visit him in Florida. Anyways, I digress. I believe it was in an alley, or not alley, arcade, in a bowling alley. I could be wrong, but he had a PlayStation also. If it was on PlayStation, I think it was there, or was it? It wasn't Dreamcast. Anyways, I digress. Batsu is our first rep. We actually have 2 for Rival Schools. Yeah, Batsu's the sole rep. He's like the face and mascot of the series. It's a no-brainer. So there he is. I would kind of hope that he comes into a Street Fighter game or some sort of crossover game if Capcom ever makes a new one, because Akira showed up in Street Fighter V, and honestly, that was pretty cool and surprised to see. So I would love to see Batsu come back, or Capcom just bring back rival schools, but it may not happen. We'll see. I wouldn't mind another one. But yeah, I digress again. That's what we have Batsu as the first rep. And as for our second rep, speaking of Akira, well, we have Akira for rival schools, the second rep. She was, like I mentioned, was just in Street Fighter V, and feels like it was not too long ago, but my God, it kind of was. Wow. At the time of this recording, Street Fighter 6 is actually almost on its first year now. But wow, I digress. Akira's pretty cool. I would love to see her come back in Street Fighter 6, but I don't know if it's likely. Either Batsu or Akira. I didn't really get to play much Street Fighter 5 because I was on the PS4 at the time. But like I said, I would love to see these two as rival school reps, so I add them to the roster. I thought they were a good choice. There could be better choices, but this is what I would pick against my own list, so feel free to have your own opinions or comments down below, but that's what I have. Akira rounds out rival schools as our second rep. Alright, moving on to our next game series from Capcom. The next IP is Final Fight. And with Final Fight, the first rep we actually have is Hagar, which might be a bit obvious choice. One of the more obvious choices, I should say. But Hagar was pretty cool. I always think he was cool as a kid. He was in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and also Infinite, to my knowledge. Infinite's the only one I did not play. I'm gonna skip that one. Anyways, I digress. Hagar, yeah. I feel like his playstyle would be a good variety to add to this game roster. If you notice, I don't have a ton of grapplers, and he's kind of like a brawler grappler, isn't he? I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. That might be something that could be improved in the roster, but hey, this is just a mixed mass kind of smash-style roster of Capcom's own series. Man, Hagar would be a good choice, honestly, to represent Final Fight. Now, he's not alone. As the next rep for Final Fight, we have Cody. And Cody is probably the more obvious choice. In fact, I'm kind of surprised I didn't lead with him, but that's just what I have in my script here. Cody is next, and Cody was actually playable in a few different Street Fighters, notably the Alpha series, 4 and also 5 as DLC. Now, like I said, he could have different, probably alt outfits. His traditional, the prison guard outfit, like the stripes, and also mirror outfit. I would love to see Cody come back in Street Fighter. So I wouldn't mind him being here on this roster as well, which is why I added him. And then we have one more rep for Final Fight, that being Guy. Guy, too, was also playable in a couple of Street Fighter games, also the Alpha series, if I remember correctly, and 4. He wasn't in 5 either, but he would be a good choice as well. Actually, I would not mind seeing Guy and Strider in the same game. Holy crap, that actually sounds pretty cool. I digress again. That would be a good choice. So we have Hagar, Cody, and Guy representing Final Fight, and that rounds it out for them. As they have ties into Street Fighter being in the same universe, which is confirmed by Capcom. I'm surprised, but that'd be those would be cool additions to see. So that's what I have for Final Fight on my roster currently. Our next Capcom IP, we actually only have 2 reps for this one, which are both Arthur and Firebrand representing Ghosts and Goblins. And these are probably the most obvious picks and no-brainers. Arthur has been in the last 2 Marvel vs. Capcom iterations, and Firebrand as well, to my knowledge. I know he was in Infinite. I can't remember if he was in the 3rd one. I think he was. Marvel vs. Capcom 3. But it's a classic series from Capcom. Well, not what more needs to be said. There are some classic series that aren't getting a lot of love, but I feel like Arthur and Firebrand are good representations of their own. I mean, they've been around for a bit, so I figure they will be good picks. So those are our 2 reps, sole reps for Ghosts and Goblins, and the only 2 reps we have currently for that series. And I think that rounds out pretty well for that one. So that's what we have for Ghosts and Goblins so far. Our next Capcom series is Red Earth. And this is one a lot of people don't know about because it was kind of, I don't think it was really released until only recently, re-released in the Capcom Fighting Game Collection. However, our first rep for Red Earth is Leo himself, who is kind of like the main protagonist or face of the franchise of that series. So it makes sense to have him. It's kind of a cool look, cool design, in my opinion. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me. I would love to see him in another 2D fighting game or something in a modern version of. So that's why he's the first rep. And our next rep for Red Earth, we have Tessa. Tessa is kind of like a mage, to my knowledge. I've never actually used her when I did play Red Earth. I should check her out one day, but I believe she's a mage that uses like elemental spells and attacks, so that's pretty cool. And I feel like that's, you know, right up someone's alley. She's kind of got a variety of attacks from what I've seen, so she kind of rounds out the roster pretty well. I don't think we have really, if any, mages or of the such, so I figure those two kind of have a good niche there and variety. So those are our 2 Red Earth reps. All right, our next series from Capcom, we have Cyberbots, and we have one sole rep for that series, who is Jin Saltome. And apologies if I butchered his last name. I've never actually heard, you know, someone can actually pronounce his last name to my knowledge. Either way, I've always heard him referred to as Jin. But this guy is from Cyberbots. He's like the face, main protagonist, main character, essentially your go-to. He was also in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And I believe the first one, if I remember correctly. I can't remember. You may have to fact check me on that one. But he was in the first 2, I believe. I know he's in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And he had a really cool design, I always thought. His robot, Lablodia, using attacks off screen, just punching and smashing people. So that's essentially my sole rep I have for Cyberbots. Jin is a pretty cool character, honestly. Doesn't get much love. Cyberbots is kind of just, I don't want to say dead franchise, which is dreadful, but yeah, not much going on there, but he was really cool. I always thought back in the day. So that's who we had for Cyberbots. Now, bear with me if I butcher the pronunciation, but our next series is Onimusha. I believe Onimusha Warlord being the first series of the games. But Samanosuke is our first rep, and I believe he's the main character of this series as well, from what my friend told me. I have a friend that plays the series, so I don't know much, but I believe he's like a samurai warrior, or not warlord, but he's basically the main hero of the story from what I was told, or implied to me. So I figured why not? Actually, there's not too many sword fighters to my knowledge on this roster besides maybe him, Leo. So I figured why not? To add some variety. Unlike, you know, Smash where we joke about there's too many sword fighters, here, why don't we add more? So I don't know a ton about the series, never played it, but you know, I figured it could be a good choice to the roster, so we went ahead and added him as well. So he's our first rep. Now we do have one more rep for Onimusha, that being Soki. Again, I'm not really familiar with this game series. I just know that it was apparently has a following, and I have a friend that said that it would be great to have both Soki and Samanosuke as playable characters in a fighting game. So I went ahead and just honored it, and you know, the very little I came across and knew, he seems like he has a transformation where he gets 2 different swords or some sort of Oni transformation, so I figured why not, that might be cool. So we're adding Soki to our roster to round out the Onimusha reps. So there we go. Next IP. Alright, next we're coming into the IP series of Beautiful Joe. And man, I haven't played this game since I was maybe a preteen. I think I played the first one on GameCube when it first came out in the early to mid 2000s. Whenever, it was 2004. Anyways, I digress. Beautiful Joe would be a great choice. He was in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, to my knowledge. He showed up in that game. He's literally a superhero that fights. He has a speed up, fast forward, I think, in the slow down ability. I don't know if you have a rewind, I can't remember, but he has those kind of powers and abilities, to my knowledge. He has a cool look also. He would stand out, I feel. He's kind of iconic. He could be. I don't know what Capcom's doing with him currently, if anything. I know there's a second game. I don't think I ever played it. But man, I missed this series. And even an anime at one point, too. I remember it vaguely. I think it was on either WB or 4Kids TV, Fox Kids, one of them. It was on something in the 2000s, but I digress. Beautiful Joe would be my next pick for his rep series. Beautiful Joe, of course, so that's who we have next. And then next, we would also be adding Sylvia, his girlfriend. She has the Warrior Sylvia outfit, you know, character design. So she can fight, you know, in her own ways as well, and in her own right. And why not? I'm sure they can differentiate the two enough. And that would give us 2 picks. The game series, I think, would do well enough for a second rep. At the very least, Joe, but I went ahead and included Sylvia on this roster as well. So those 2 make it in for the Beautiful Joe series as well on this roster. Alright, coming up next of our next Capcom series, we have Power Stone. And admittedly, Power Stone is yet another IP I don't know a ton of. I only heard of it recently myself, a couple years back. I want to say in college, I had a buddy that played it, and he would actually play it often, either in class or just at home as well. But he was big on Capcom fighting games as well. Now, there is a debate if Power Stone is considered a fighting game or just a party game, but it looks like a fun game, honestly, from what I was told and what I've seen. And so, with the Capcom rep that we have for Power Stone, I went ahead and just chose Falcon. Again, I don't know a ton about this series, but Falcon pretty much seems to be the main protagonist. He felt like a safe character, and he seems like he has a good following as well, and I don't think anyone would be upset that he's in, to my knowledge. And Power Stone fans would probably enjoy this, so he is essentially the sole rep that we have for Power Stone here. And I was also informed that there was a Power Stone 2, I believe, and also an anime. I have to check that out myself, but I'd be down to play it myself, honestly. It looks fun, sounds fun. So yeah, we have Falcon on our roster as well, as sole rep for Power Stone. And finally, last but not least, for our last IP from Capcom, is our last sole final rep for that own series. We have Captain Commando. And honestly, I'm actually surprised I didn't think to put him on this list earlier, and that's honestly my bad. It's been a while since I've seen Captain Commando around. He was in the first and second Marvel vs. Capcom, and he had his own series as well. He literally is Capcom. Get it? Captain Commando. Capcom. So, I mean, it just feels right. He's a classic character from classic IP with Capcom, to my opinion as well, and I think he'd be a great pick, honestly. I would love to see him even updated in a modern Captain Commando game would be cool too. That would be fire, honestly. So I think he belongs in this roster. It feels like a crime not to have him. I mean, honestly, he was one of the, not one of the first, but I mean, it felt like an obvious pick to me halfway through making his, the roster list myself. So I had to add him on here. He is our last entrant to appear on this list, of course, but that doesn't mean any form of disrespect. But we do have Captain Commando as his own sole rep. It's time to bring him back. So he makes it on this roster, and that rounds out our list as the last IP and character as well to add right now on this base roster. And there you have it, folks. This was my take on a sort of what if scenario if there is a upcoming or sequel to the original Capcom Fighting Evolution, a mix mash of Capcom's characters and IPs from game series in a kind of 2.5 fighting game. Again, this is just a what if scenario for a build that roster. So, of course, if you agree or disagree, that's totally fine. Feel free to let me know in the comment section down below, or if you have your own roster that you built for a, kind of what if mock-up of a upcoming Capcom Fighting Evolution game, or, a mix-mash, kind of Smash Bros. Style thing. Again, this was a blast to make, and I am ecstatic to see fighting games on the uptick again. So, I mean, it might be a bit of wishful thinking, but I would love a new Darkstalkers, but beggars can't be choosers, I suppose. I got Street Fighter 6, so hey. But anywho, with that being said, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps out with the algorithm if you like the video, and subscribe to join the Gengar gang, or if you just want more content on my channel, as I'll try to pop up some videos every now and then when I can. Aside from that, like I said, it's been a blast making this video, and as always, this is Raven Sledge straight out of Lavender Town. I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining, and bye.